Welcome back to Hodgepodge. Today I'm with recent graduate Jules Struble, who developed her own instrument. And chances are, if you're watching this video, you probably watched our introductory video on her instrument, the Muse 1.0. If you haven't seen that video, definitely go check it out. This is going to be a little interview style video to gain a better insight into Julia's instrument, the Muse 1.0, and to gain a better insight into what inspired her instrument and her senior thesis project. Jules, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
No problem, Ryan.
What initially inspired your thesis project?
Well, so you know that I also minor in music over at Setner. So the idea of perhaps programming some sort of a musical tool had been sitting around my brain for quite some time, but the idea of the instrument first really took shape when I was in contemporary improvisational ensemble. So I'm in the ensemble, and so I also play the guitar, classical, jazz. So I'm in this ensemble with an electric guitar. There is also a keyboard, a piano, a saxophone, and something else I forgot.
Trombone? Was there another classical instrument?
No, I was the only electric.
Okay.
So maybe a flute.
Okay.
So during the last rehearsal before a concert, I brought in my own amp and my own effects pedals to play with a little, to see how that went. And my professor came to me and told me that was great, that playing with these pedals, it really got me thinking about the tone more than just hanging on to the pitch. So that got me thinking. I, as an electric guitarist, have so much more tonal freedom than any of the acoustic instruments. I mean, not to say that there isn't an acoustic range, with a tonal range with acoustic instruments, but as soon as you get the sound converted into an electrical signal, you have so much freedom with how you want to modify that signal. And that got me thinking, what else could be possible?
So what you're saying is that as a composer and a musician, tone should be valued as equally as pitch, and that you should use tone in your compositions as much as you use pitch, and that these acoustic instruments didn't necessarily lend themselves to tonal manipulation as well as your electric guitar.
Well, I wouldn't say that you should compose with tone over pitch, but I am saying that it is another possible world of creative expression that could be accessed. And yes, I would agree with you on your statement of electrical instruments, because as I explained before, if you're familiar with how an instrument converts the sound into an electric signal, it's the metal strings vibrating over the magnetic pickups that create a disturbance in their magnetic field. That disturbance creates an electric signal, which is then sent to the amplifier and converted back into sound. And that time when the sound exists as an electric signal, because it's an electric signal, you're able to manipulate it much more than you can with an acoustic instrument. Once it exists as an electric signal, it doesn't have to be a guitar. It could be any stringed instrument could use this method of electrification. So that, anywho, back on subject, that got me thinking. The electric guitar is still limited, though, in the sense that you have these after effects you can apply, but you're still starting from the same starting point. You're still starting from the same sound of strummed strings. So even though you have much greater tone control than your custom acoustic instruments, it's still not absolute. It's still not as much as it could be.
What you're saying is that there is more tonal manipulation with an electrical instrument, but you went with not just an electrical instrument, but a digital electric instrument, and that was for a specific reason. Can you elaborate on that?
So let me explain a little bit about how sound works, just for background knowledge in case. So if you're not familiar with the idea, sound is literally waves traveling through the air. That might be a little hard to visualize, but it's ripples of air pressure, actually. So that's why sound needs a medium to travel through, unlike, say, light waves. Drawings that you're familiar with are representations of how any individual molecule in the air, any individual particle in the air, is going to be moved around by these ripples of sound. So the way that they move is represented in a graphical illustration in the way that the way we're all most used to seeing sound waves represented. With digital instruments, you have control over the wave shape that you are putting out, in addition to any after effects you may want. So a guitar, you have a set wave shape that is then manipulated with your effects. With a digital instrument, you can have any wave shape you want and then apply any effects you want. So there's another level of acoustic freedom to be found there.
You're basically changing the instrument itself when you change the wave shape.
Basically, which is why it's so exciting, because before modern technology, this wasn't feasible. You'd be stuck with a flute, with a drum.
You had developed all of these insights and findings and wishes for an instrument. How did you go about creating the Muse 1.0 that did all these things?
Well, you mentioned that this was my thesis for my industrial interaction design senior year project. So I have a bit of a background in programming. So it was quite the process. I programmed it mostly in a language called Pure Data because it's written, the language itself is very good at working with visual audio stuff. So it just made sense to program it in that language. I certainly had an interesting prototype iteration with a few failed attempts at getting it to have some physical interface.
What were the biggest obstacles along the way?
The biggest obstacle would probably be the communication of the idea. It was a bit of a tough sell at first. At least before I had my first prototype, it was. Thank you, by the way, for convincing me to show Professor Fathers the instrument.
I did a lot of encouraging. That's one of the reasons why I feel very invested in this. Not to take credit for anything, but...
Had I not shown Fathers, that wouldn't be my thesis.
I did a lot of pushing. When Jules showed me this, she described it in a way that I understood. And that was the trouble, was I think you described this to a lot of people who don't come from a music background, who don't necessarily have even a basic understanding of what you're trying to describe. And so she's telling these professors who are very intelligent people, they just don't understand the world of music, and I saw it as a breakthrough. And so I understand when you say that was one of the biggest obstacles.
Yeah, one of the examples is I kept on assuming that people knew that sound was waves, and I learned that I should not assume that, so that was probably the biggest obstacle. But there were others, of course, like just figuring out the math and various prototyping issues. Getting it on the phone was also a pain.
Yeah, you're going to see, if you watch the demo video, and hopefully we'll put a little snippet in this interview as well, how all this programming, all this math, and you have it fit on an Android screen, and you're planning to release this. Mm-hmm. You're releasing a beta version. Mm-hmm. Do you know when?
I don't have an exact date yet, but I do know that it's going to be before the end of summer.
And it will be on the App Store?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. The link will be in the video description if you're interested in checking out the app. I hope you do. It's really neat. I think it's revolutionary. Jules, again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
No problem.
Make sure you check out her app. It will be in the video description below. As always, thanks for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up. Check out my other videos and subscribe.